Hey, good evening, everyone. We're live. Welcome back to another episode of Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes here with Chuck Manley and Steve Bollier. We are here with David Weber, the New York Times bestselling author of the Honor Harrington series, as well as the Safehold series and a lot of other books that you have most likely read. It's season 3. It is episode 52. Last time David was on the show, we had the record for longest live episode ever in Keystroke Medium history. And not only did we have the longest ever live show, we had the longest ever pre-show and longest ever post-show. So it was like three MVPs that we have laid at the feet of David Weber since the show's inception. So thank you very much for that, David, and thanks for coming back on the show. We really appreciate it.
I'll try not to keep you out that late this time.
No, it's fun.
Oh, you talk as long as you want to talk, sir.
we were discussing earlier this week. We were all in Vegas. Well, most of the cool people were. Chuck wasn't. For a writers'
Remember
conference.
what I said earlier?
Yeah. And we were trying to figure out how we could break the record again, because we went for 2 hours and 20 some odd minutes the last time. So maybe we'll have to do something different this time to set a record. But yeah, so Uncompromising Honor came out here recently. You hit the New York Times best selling list, and you've been on there for a while now. And I think that's what the third or fourth book that you've had on the list.
Oh no, it's about the 27th book that
Well, I'm just saying out of the Honor Harrington series.
Well, yeah, out of the Honor Harringtons, I think 4.
Yeah.
But I think I think 4 have broken the top 10. It's either 3 or 4 broken the top 10. Several more have been on the extended list. And I got to tell you, the nature of the list has changed a lot since I started writing. When we put out War of Honor, Bain printed 100,000 copies in hardcover. Okay. When we shipped Uncompromising Honor, they printed 28,000. And it wasn't because they expected lower sales. It was because the ebooks are such a big part of the sales now. I mean, I was thinking about it. I actually wrote the first 2 Honor Harringtons the year before Al Gore invented the internet. I mean, that's how long I've been doing this. And I think it was probably Honor Among Enemies before I was able to send them the book electronically. When I started doing this, everything had to be re-keyboarded, even if I'd done it electronically. And I think that was union, not electronic difficulties.
Right.
But now with PageMaker and everything else, I zip them the file and they can run it through production in-house. It's just incredible how the business has changed. Of course, I was thinking about it the other day. I sold the first book in 1989. So next year I've been doing this for like 30 years.
That's very awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of scary for me. I'm like, I'm not old enough to have been doing anything for 30 years. Oh, damn. Yes, I am. My darling daughter, Morgan, some of my Czech fans gave me a really nice pocket knife for my birthday a few years back. It says David Weber on the other side, on one side, and on the other side it says from the crew of HMS Iwo Jima on his 62nd birthday.
That's awesome.
So my daughter Morgan is looking at it. She said, "That's really cool, Dad." She looked at the other side. She said, "Are you really 62? And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You're old." And I was like, oh, how crueler, that sharper than a serpent's tooth, But I mean, they turned 17 in October. Okay. And our son Michael turns 16 next month. So for an old fart, I got some young folks to try and keep up with around here.
Oh yeah, I was trying to do the math the other day. I have a 13-year-old who just turned 13, and then I have a 1.5-year-old. So I was trying to do the math of how long I was going to be in teenagers until It's a long time, and I'm not I'm not sure I'm okay with that.
Well,
Like,
there's only 14 months between Michael and the girls, and
mm,
we got them. I may have told you last time. We went from 0 to 3 in 4 weeks and 2 days
mm,
because the girls are adopted from Cambodia.
right.
So we went from 0 to 3 in 4 weeks, and we're going to go from 3 to 0 in 1 year.
Wow.
Yeah, assuming that Michael gets into college, which is not necessarily a given. If they only want him to take history, oh, it's a slam dunk. If they want him to take anything else, it's going to be an uphill fight. He is so like his father, it is scary. Except
I
physically. Physically,
it's
he's a
fun.
clone of his mom.
It's funny, your daughter put that on the 62nd birthday, and you're like, oh, that can't be right. Well, I remember when we lived in Germany, we gave my dad his 40th birthday party, so over the hill party. So we had black balloons and cemeteries and all these things. And my brother and I, who are twins,
Coming home to haunt you here, isn't it?
yeah. Well, yeah. We were just talking about it the other day. My brother and I, who are both 37 now, we both turned to each other and we were like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, and my dad looks at us and goes, "Yeah, that's right. Yeah."
He looked at you and he went, "Oh boy," he's rubbing his hands.
It always
Like,
comes back
"Don't be
around.
mocked."
It always comes back around.
Karma is Yeah, well, the girls, I'm pretty sure the girls were pulling my chain a couple of years ago. They said, "Dad, if we had babies when we were 25, how old would you be?" And I said, "Well, you're 15 this year and I'm 64 this year, so I'd be 74." And Megan looked at Morgan and said, "We better get started."
Oh, no.
No. I'm pretty sure they were pulling Dad's chain.
Well, talking about having a long career in science fiction and just authorship in general, you've written in several genres, and we actually got to talk to a lot of authors this last week in Vegas. Um, and just we hung out with Chris Kennedy, who and
yeah.
Mark Wan, his wife, and a whole bunch of other people that are there. And it was just fun to hang out and talk to everybody. And we got to see a whole bunch of our fans in person. So it was pretty legit.
Chris and I are actually doing a collaboration right now.
Yes, he would not spill the beans to Chris's.
I will.
Yeah,
I will.
Hey, so
Spill away.
Spill away. We always like the inside scoop. It's a sequel to Out of the Dark, right?
Yep. Well, okay. I don't know how much I'm going to spill of beans here. You already had that part. Yeah, part of the problem with Out of the Dark is that we didn't get the sequel out as promptly as I had hoped to. Because if I had gotten the sequel out, a lot of these people who are like, "Oh my God, vampires," would be a lot less upset with me because they would have found out some stuff about the vampires they don't know yet. They should have noticed they don't glitter in sunlight. They can't be regulation vampires,
But they're on fire.
Yes, only when they're on fire. But there just hasn't been a time window for me to do the book in. And there really still isn't. So Chris and I are doing it as a collaboration. And so far, it seems to be going well. We're about a third of the way through it, about 50, 60,000 words. We're shooting to keep it under 200. Out of the Dark wasn't. Hey. It's easier for some people than others.
Right,
okay?
right.
It really is.
But I think it's going to be fun. And we're very cleverly, since it's a sequel to Out of the Dark, we're calling it Into the Light. There you go.
Yes.
But I will say this:
I don't get it. Hold on, wait.
when I wrote the original short story that appeared in an anthology that George Martin was one of the editors on, George R. R. Martin, the vampires were regulation vampires. Okay. And none of the stuff that happened elsewhere was in the story. Everything that happened was what happened in Romania. Tom Doherty at Tor really loved the story, and he wanted me to expand it into a novel. But I figured, I can't really do a whole, and he wanted me to do a series. Okay. I'm like, I can't really do a series that's going to be all about Count Dracula. I mean, I like Vlad, okay, and I like the character. I can work with him, but the whole notion of stake through his heart and all the rest of it, it didn't work. So I came up with a different take on what vampires are and how they came into existence that there just wasn't any hint of in the novelization. So the Into the Light gets into that stuff that there wasn't time to get into in Out of the Dark. And like I say, I think some people who were pissed off by the vampires will be less pissed off. Some of them are just so pissed off by the vampires they will never forgive me for that, no matter what I do. It's
I wasn't even like I didn't see it coming, but it didn't. When I read it, I wasn't like, oh, it's such a cop out or whatever. Like I really enjoyed it. I thought, oh, that was it. I mean, you spend the whole book on a kind of an Earth invasion story, and then you get different twists at the end. I thought it was neat having vampires come in or non-vampires.
Well, what was I going to say? You had said something that kicked off a train of thought, but see, this would have been for my pre-concussion mind. It would have been like I would have had it like that. As it is, I have to go spelunking to find thoughts. But
I said it went. It was basically like
I know what I was going to say. There were hints all the way through the first half of that book. If you ever went back and reread it, okay, I did everything but run up a big flag that say, here there be vampires, and everybody was so into them. Ooh, this is so cool. It's like Tom Clancy meets, Independence Day kind of thing. Well, that probably wasn't the best comparison in the world. But they were really happy. And then all of a sudden they got the vampires. And so they never checked the rearview mirror to see what might be coming up behind or anything like that. I do not know why I have so many readers who say I'm sneaky. I am the most forthright person I know. I just know things they don't. So it's it's kind of like in the Unharrington books. I was waving the French Revolution at you so hard in my left hand to make you convinced that was what the peeps were. I even gave you a gender switched Napoleon and Esther McQueen. So you're all looking over here. And meanwhile, over here with my right hand, very quietly, I'm creeping around towards telling you that, no, it's based on the U.S. Constitution. And this little guy you met in the second book named Tom Theismann, when he gets all grown up, he's going to be Cincinnatus and restore the Republic. But everybody was like, okay, I confess, tennis court oath, Robespierre, but everybody was sure they knew what I was doing. And then I said, well, actually,
Well, and I think too with that series, it grew along with probably from book 1 to what do you think, 8 or 9 or 10, the whole Republic of Haven arc that was just so massive. I don't know that you could actually come back and go, he didn't foreshadow that enough, or I didn't see that coming, right? Like with Theismann, you didn't see that where that was going, but it wasn't like a out of the left field type thing.
Well, one of the things that I like to do is to promote secondary characters. And I will sometimes bury somebody I intend to promote in the secondary characters when I introduce them. Because I know some people say, my God, he's got so many characters in his damn books. I hate books where somebody's referred to as the lieutenant for 3 chapters. Okay.
Right.
He or she has a name, damn it. And the people who know him are going to use it when they talk to him or her. And so I name every character who's going to be directly addressed or address somebody in one of the books. And when I name them, I jot down a very brief physical description and their age so that I keep track of that, and maybe I try to include some little individualized hook for each of them, like, plays chess, or something like that.
That might be the smartest thing I've ever heard that I never thought of doing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do you guys
Yeah.
write down every character? Like, I mean, Josh, you
Absolutely.
probably see. I don't, man.
I do.
I'm constantly
even-
going back into manuscripts and.
Well, you
Yeah,
should
for
see.
the main characters, I'll actually have them introduce themselves to me in their own voice. Like I'll actually write out, "Hi, I'm so and so," and they'll tell me about themselves like they're talking to me through the keyboard.
And if you kill me off, I will come back and haunt your butt.
The best to do that with are the antagonists, because they're going to justify why they're doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always fun. Yeah.
And I might not go to that extent where you're like creating, like you said, he plays chess, right? But while I'm writing a book and I need a name, I'll either use a name check or I'll just make one up, but then it automatically goes in a character document.
Yep.
Like, and just write, because I write in Scrivener, right? So I have the main portion there, and then I have the character document somewhere open where I can just hop to it and go, here's the new character, this is where he's at. So I can.
Well, I write in Dragon. Okay.
Yep.
And the big problem with Dragon is that if you move from one document to the other, it has to unload the voice file from the one you're in from RAM and then load the other one before it will let you in. If the documents are only 4,000 words, that's not a problem. You get up to 40,000 words of a manuscript, you can sit here for 5 minutes while you wait for the files to load out. So I have 2 towers and I have 3 displays. Okay. And I keep the manuscript file for the total file on Office 2. And that's also where I keep the open reference files. And I have a single mouse and a single keyboard for both machines.
Yeah.
So I work on this one. I do any online research that I'm doing on the left screen. Okay. And then, which is also on Office 1 computer, because it doesn't care if I go on the internet. I'm not opening another document file as far as it can tell. And then I've got all the background document files open over here, and I can cut and paste from one screen to another. So when I create the character, I create the character name, the physical description, the age, and so forth on this one. Then I just cut and paste into the character list. And there it is. Now on the Safehold books, on the Safehold books, I have a 16-page, 12-point, 4-column table that has the name of every single named character in the current book, plus his birth date.
Damn.
And what that does is I can go in there and I can do a search for the character name and figure to know exactly how old the character is. And in the Safehold book that's coming out in January, I cover like 15 years in a single book. So keeping track of how old everybody is, especially when it seems like everybody on the damn planet is having kids, is a not insignificant advantage.
Right.
I just kill my characters when I can't remember information.
All right. Okay.
How old was he? It doesn't matter. Stab him in the heart. It's over.
You won't tell me your age. You're gone. Okay, I got it. But did I ever tell you that I figured out why the body count in John Ringo novels is as high as it is?
Why?
Okay, what John really excels at is taking a group of characters and building relationships between them. Okay, if you read one of his books, there's a lot of action in it and everything else, but you're seeing the interaction of the characters. They get more and more fully developed. And he's great, but he gets about halfway through the book and he says, "Oh my God, there's a sequel." Okay, so what I'm really good at is, I don't know that he's consciously reasoned that out, but on some level, what he's saying is, ooh, what I do best is introducing new characters and bringing them along. I have too many characters to do that in the sequel.
Yeah.
I must have a big battle.
Right. Time for a culling.
Yeah, exactly. See, he's not as good at I am as just, transferring them off the ship or something. He needs a more final solution to his problem. But one of the advantages of all of the secondary characters that I develop is that I do have the rule that nobody is immortal in my books. And if I get to an do they or don't they situation with a major character, I roll dice. to determine whether or not that character makes it. Okay. And then I've got to, then I got to figure out, oh my God, he dogged on the dice, and you have to.
How many
go back.
times do you roll until you get the character that you want?
Yeah, well, no, it doesn't work that way. I will say that depending on how close they are to honor, I actually have like a tiered system. Okay, depending on how close they are to honor, they get an ad on the dice. Okay, like Uncle Jacques on a 20-side die. Uncle Jacques and Hamish get about 3 bonus points.
Yeah, I've got some percentile die. I do something similar.
But I got to tell you, the last time that I checked for Jacques, oh, he just limped over the line. I thought we'd lost him. And Hamish was with him, so that would have been like really bad. But because if somebody else dogs out, then you lose 2 spots on the dice if you're in the same compartment with them. But I think it's important that I don't get to the point where there are characters that I flat out refuse to kill because of the nature of what it is I write. The fact that this is the people in the characters in the books lose people they love. And if the reader doesn't get to share that experience with them from time to time, then you trivialize not just the story, but you trivialize the whole concept of of all of the bad crap wrapped up in real combat, if you see what I'm saying. Now, I will confess that every so often I reach a point where I say, okay, I have earned the right to give this character a happy ending.
Right.
But I try not to do that too often. But where I was going when I started all this is because I name all of my secondary characters, I've got a deep bench. If I lose a major character, just like in the military, it's like stepping into dead men's shoes. I have a secondary character that I can promote to the starting lineup. And that's always good when you realize, that. But
so interesting question then. Did you know when you created Thiessen as a secondary character that you were going to move him into the position that he made, or did that happen later?
Yeah. No, I knew from the moment that he is one of the guys that I buried in the bushes. Yeah. Okay. The majority of the secondary characters in my novels are just that. They're secondary characters. Okay. That may get promoted, may not. There's a handful that I tuck away in there that I know are going to become players on a larger stage, assuming that they don't die along the way. And those characters get like 4 points on the dice in any kind of a military situation. Well, I mean, because it's a real pain when you have to go back and rewrite the entire plot strand because the dummy didn't duck. I mean, I'm just saying. So brilliant. I'm just saying, that's how my characters repay me. They just stand there and get killed, but it's I will say that the biggest problem I had in the Honorverse, the biggest single issue I ever ran into, was when Eric Flint and I collaborated, and we pulled the Mason alignment plot line forward about 25 years from where I'd planned for it to fall. Because Honor was supposed to die in the climactic battle against the Republic of Haven. And her dying words were supposed to be, "Tell the Queen, for God's sake, let it end here," which is why Elizabeth would have sent a peace mission to Haven. But because everything had gotten moved forward, there wasn't time for me to have her kids grow up to tackle the Mason alignment, which was the original time. It was a generational challenge kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I won't pretend that I'm sorry that Honor didn't get killed, because not only do the fans love her, okay, but I've been with her for a long time now. And man, that would have been hard. I'd have done it, but it would have been hard. I think readers would have forgiven me because of the way she would have died. Basically, if you remember, At All Costs, her and McKeon's roles would have been flipped. She would have been with in the Manticore home system with a small component of 8th Fleet. And McKeon would have ridden to the rescue and gotten there only after she'd been killed. And the reader would have found out at the same time in the same way that they found out about McKeon in the actual book. But that worked well. But the problem was that the Solarian League was supposed to have like 25 more years to get a clue about how outclassed it was. And it took me a couple of books to get my way worked around to where I could do Uncompromising Honor, which ends the war against the Solarian League very much as I had intended to end it. But it was supposed to be one of her kids on the bridge, not her. So I'm like I said,
that actually leads me to a couple questions. Right before I get to those, I want to talk about the sponsor for the week, and then we can move into those.
Yep.
This sponsor for the week was actually supposed to be Luke Barnett, but he gave up his spot in preference to authors for Brandon Barr. Brandon Barr has he's got cancer, and they've been doing a lot of GoFundMe and a lot of promotions for his books. There's a Facebook page that a whole bunch of authors have put together and basically been promoting his books so that his wife and family will basically be okay when he finally does pass. So this week,
is it pretty definite that that's what's going to happen at this point?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Josh, go ahead. I have something. I've been a part of this whole process, and I've been, I've been helping with the, not helping, but like I've been promoting a lot of it, and we tried to sell Rise of the Seer, which is his new book, and we've helped sell 4,000 copies. He's gotten 40,000 page reads. $55,000 was raised in the GoFundMe. I don't know if you have all this. Do you have all this? Am I blowing?
I don't have the GoFundMe. I have the Rise of the Seer stuff.
Guys. Send me the link to this so that I can put it on my Facebook.
Absolutely will.
Okay. Outstanding.
Sharon will copy it to hers too.
Yeah, he's selling about 80 to 100 copies a day at $2.99, and I think there was something like 1,100 pre-orders on book 2.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a beautiful thing. There's so many authors involved in this.
Yeah,
it's just been amazing to see. David, I'll send it to you right now.
Okay, copy it to Sharon too.
We'll do. Yeah, we'll do.
Okay.
So I put the link in our live chat. It'll be in the show notes as well. But the book is Rise of the Seer, and it's by Brandon Barr, and the description is thus: 2 women, 2 worlds, 1 epic destiny. Discover a dazzling epic fantasy series by USA Today bestselling author Brandon Barr. Hashtag Brandon's Buddies.
Mm-hmm.
A God-gifted young woman is chosen for a grim task, one that will take her beyond the boundaries of her world. Winter's chilling visions of the future make clear that her choices will not only affect the success of her mission, but whether those she loves will live or die. On the distant world of Hearth, Makusia is the daughter of a dying king. As he wages a bitter war in the north, a growing evil devours the villages of the east. She would turn her kingdom's forces to face the emerging threat, but first she must gain the throne and confront the secret desire that torments her soul. Through worlds apart, I can't say it again. Masusia and Winter's destiny. I'm just gonna say her and Winter's destiny are bound together by portals of an ancient prophecy that promises to pull friend and foe together in a devastating collision. An excellent choice for fans of Anne McCaffrey and Terry Brooks. Rise of the Seer is book 1 of the Song of the World series by Brandon Barr. Like I said, it's in the live chat. It'll be in the show notes. Dave, I'm gonna forward you the email with it.
Great
here. So
it's like trying to preach through the Book of Kings, man.
I was just thinking while you were doing that, what kind of guy would give character names that are hard to pronounce?
Right?
Never do that. Not ridiculous. Oh, yeah. I will say that the one thing that if I were starting the Safe Hold books over again today, the one thing that I would do is I would use standardized spellings on the names.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, I was going to do what Sprague de Camp did in The Arrows of Hercules, and I was going to give each kingdom a different English dialect. Like in Sprague's book, the Athenians were like, I think, published school British, and the Spartans were Greek, and somebody else was Glaswegian. I mean, it's like, but dialect is hard, not so much on the writer, but on the reader. Okay. So what I figured instead, to show how language had drifted when it was they no longer had audio recordings to keep it where it needed to be, was that I would show how the language had shifted by the way that the spelling, pronunciation of the names had shifted. And I think it was a good idea, but not a great one, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, I remember reading the books, and I think originally when I first started reading them, I was trying to figure out if you were like purposely trying to spell them differently to get me to read them differently, or if I was just going to ignore the spelling and read it how I saw it in my head. Yeah. Because I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think a lot of the vowels that I would think will be like I, you replace them with Y. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of it, I was thinking, well, how's the Y's? Is it supposed to sound like the I? And should I just read it like the I? And so a lot of times I just did that.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Josh, you remember when we were both reading that Mike Cole book together? And
yeah.
I was listening to it and you were reading it. Mm-hmm. And I finally looked up how you spell whatever that main character's name was. Yep. And I texted you and I'm like, what the hell is this?
Right. Because in the book I read it as Heloise.
Right.
And,
I don't remember what it was.
I think you said it was like hell was.
Like
she kept saying hell was. It was and it's actually Heloise.
Well, okay. When Catherine, I can't remember her last name. She's been the narrator on a bunch of the Honor Harrington books, and I love her work. But anyway, I don't really listen to audiobooks because, to be honest, I don't have the time. Yeah, I'm sorry. I can read a whole lot faster than I can listen. But she sent me emails. We corresponded back and forth for almost a week before she started the first book. And she wanted to know, what kind of accent would they have in Haven? What kind of accent on Manticore? What kind on Sphinx? Everything else. And one of the questions that she asked me was, is it Manticoran or Manticoran? And,
wow, I would never have pronounced it that way.
Well, but I picked the wrong one in my response to her. So she pronounced it Manticoran, and some of my fans were like really upset, especially if they heard me at readings pronouncing it Manticoran.
Right.
So I went back and pulled my email because I said, I know I told her how to pronounce that. I went back and looked, and lo and behold, I had sent her the wrong one. So I went in and posted on Bane's Bar, hey guys, this is my fault. I posted on my site too. And I actually got an email from her that said, oh, thank you. Most writers would have just thrown me under the bus.
Is that Allison Johnson you're talking about?
Allison Johnson. Yes. That's who I was thinking about. I don't know why I was coming up with Catherine. I'm going to blame it on the cement floor in Atlanta.
It's all right. We're live, but we can go back and edit it.
Okay. Yeah, we'll edit it.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, so what's interesting about that is last time you were here, we talked about how you got into dictation because you fractured your wrist and your hand and all that. And now this time
I fall down a lot. And it's not because I drink, okay?
That's funny.
So one of the questions that one of our viewers and fans of the show, Richard Fox, who's a military science fiction author. He's written the Ember War series. It's very popular, very well received for the fans. He's wanting to know, after 30 years or so of writing military science fiction and space opera, what's the secret to keep a series going that long? I mean, to keep your fan base to return. I've got an actual follow-up question to that, but to keep your fan base coming back and enjoying the character and the stories, what's the secret?
Let's remind everybody, how many books is it? 27, did you say?
No, that's how many I've had on the bestsellers.
Okay,
Actually,
okay.
I've had 32 total on the bestsellers list, including the tour books. I've had 27 Baen titles.
Okay.
If I'm remembering correctly, and I'm not sure that I am, Uncompromising Honor is the 17th in the what people think of as the Honor Harrington books.
Actually, I've got it pulled up right now. It says book 19.
Okay, now are they counting the shadow books in that list? Do you know? Because,
I'm not sure. It just says Honor Harrington book 19, Uncompromising.
If you're looking on Amazon, it might be counting the shadow books.
Okay, I don't know.
See, they are part of that storyline. You really those really need to be read to understand what's going on.
It's not like Crown of Slaves. You don't have to read Crown of Slaves to follow the rest of the series. I mean, you do, but it's
kind of do.
Right.
That's where Victor and Anton, really start to roll together. But the problem is that the Honorverse is such a big canvas that you can't cover everything in books about one person. Okay. I mean, if you look at it, the limiting factor in trying to write about a war, if you're only going to focus on what happens in and around your primary character or your small primary character set, is you can't be a very big war, or else somehow they have to be at every critical point at the critical moment, which I always hated when I would realize that was what was happening in a series. And I think probably one of the reasons that the books have the literary universe has lasted as long as it has is that it's not just about honor. It's about all these other characters. I mean, people want to find out what happens to Eloise Pritchard. They want to find out they were upset when Esther McQueen got blown up, but I mean, hey, but they well, I'm sorry, but they want to find out what's happening in the political structure. And I think part of it too is I love building worlds. Okay. I like building political structures and parties and everything. I think that people who don't like history because they never had a history teacher who explained to them that history is the greatest novel ever written.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, if you look at the characters in it and everything else, and you really get inside them, that tells you how to write stories, because there's what really happened. Okay. And this is how people really reacted. So you've got all of that material sitting there, and people who don't like history never realize it's there. And I think that's why a lot of military fiction is relatively sterile, because the people who are writing it don't have a real sense of history, no matter how good a sense they have of current day military technology. You have to have both. I have an enthusiastic layman's knowledge of modern warfighting technology. Okay, I have an in-depth postgraduate, been studying history since the 5th grade knowledge of history. And I think that bleeds over, if you will, into the novels. I think that people think of them as real places that they have visited. Okay. And I do. And I kind of keep people on their toes a little bit, because they know I hide Easter eggs in the books. Okay. Right. They know that I'm going to throw them a curve here or there somewhere. And when they get it, they'll realize that they saw it coming all the way, but they didn't realize they had. Generally. In Mutineer's Moon, in the Dahak novels, okay, I knew going in that Colin McIntyre was going to have to figure out how to blow up 1.5 million starships when he didn't have 1.5 million starships to do it.
Right.
So it's on either the first or the second page. I set up how he would do it of the first novel, and he doesn't have to do it until you're 2/3 of the way through the second novel. And I just had the captain of Dahak's original captain reflect that if Dahak had been a little bit farther in system when his faster than light drive malfunction, it would have disturbed the planetary orbits a lot more and might even have caused the star to go nova. And then I just left it there until I needed to make a star go nova, a book and a half later. And I think that's one of the things that you have to do if you want a series to be long running. The other thing you need to do is there needs to be change in it. If it's a long series and they're fighting with exactly the same weapons they had at the beginning of the series, or exactly the same tactics, or exactly the same operational doctrine, then it's the same old, same old.
Right.
Okay. And I think that's, and it also, it's kind of like somebody who builds a fantasy world and you realize when you've been all over their fantasy world that judging by the climate variation, basically their world is the size of Connecticut. Okay. I mean, I'm just saying, and so you've got to have that same approach towards the toolbox you give your characters. There has to be room for it to grow and to change. And it helps if you go into it with a notion about how it's going to grow and change. You can find out along with the characters if you really want to, but trust me, when you're God, it helps to have a plan. Okay. We see how well it worked out for him with where we ended up, but I think finally, ultimately, the thing that makes any kind of a storyline run to the length that this one has run to has to be the characters themselves. People have to care about the characters. Now, they don't have to like them all, right. Okay, but they have to be invested in them, even if it's just waiting to see Jasper Clinton get his at the end of the jihad, okay, or waiting for the moment when Theismann gets to tell Oscar Saint-Just goodbye. It's a bunch of stuff, and it's also luck. I have read authors that I think are at least as good as I am, who have not had the degree of success that I have had. Now, yeah, I work hard at it. That's why I was hitting the wall a year and a half ago, is that I was working on about 4.5 hours of sleep for about 8 months because I was pushing deadlines and whatnot. Yeah, it's like, to quote my kind and gentle physician, David, you can't be doing this shit anymore. You're not 30 anymore. You're not 40 anymore. Hell, you're not 50 anymore. And I'm like, okay, you can stop. But he said, but my point is, I know, and I'm not 60 anymore either. I have put in my time in the trenches. And up until about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, I was writing about 750,000 words a year. I'm going to have to cut back to maybe 500,000, which, as my wife points out, if I wrote books the size other people do, would still be 4 books a year.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm sorry, honey, but I think another thing that is critically important, I mean, there's a lot of things that are important in having a storyline. I mean, you guys, you've been there. The characters and the story, the entire world, do not write down to your audience. Right. Pay them the compliment of assuming they're smart enough to understand what you just said.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've been reading along and I've been like, what? You thought I didn't notice? Okay, maybe they won't notice everything you're doing, especially like the first time through. Okay, maybe you did something really clever and really neat that you want to be sure that they notice, but don't be obvious about it. Okay, if they notice it, fine. If they don't notice it, obviously the book worked for them without it, or else they're not going to buy any more. And if they reread the series, they'll go, oh, when they catch it the second or the third time around. You see what I'm saying?
That's what I was going to say. I've read series twice, and a lot of ones that like you're talking about where you'll put in those Easter eggs or those things, the foreshadowing that don't really mean anything. But you go back the second time and you're like, oh, holy shit, that's fantastic.
It's probably Brandon Sanderson. I'm just saying.
I didn't mention any names. I didn't say anything. All I'm doing here is just talking and just having a conversation.
I just want to noted that it wasn't me that did that. I'm just going to.
Well,
I might have a little bit of a complex. I'm sorry.
I have a friend who's black, and he called me up after about the fourth Honor Harrington book. He phoned me and he said, "The Queen of Manticore is black." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "No, you don't understand. The Queen of Manticore." I said, I kind of do understand. You know, I wrote the book. You know, he says, "No, but nobody says anything about it." And I said, and that's what they said about it. you know,
right.
But it had completely gone by him up until that point, despite the fact that he's an African American, okay, who normally, you know, he's kind of on the lookout to see whether or not African American characters are used and portrayed properly. Okay. Sure. And I'm not talking about racist or not racist. He wants them to be, I guess, authentically is the word that I want. You know, and he was like, that went right by me. And well, I wouldn't want to say anything about observant, but if I did, I would, you know, kind of. But yeah, you know, and I take that almost as a compliment. Okay, because it worked. It worked exactly the way I wanted it to work for him. Okay, which was that for everybody around her, it was so much not a matter to be talked about. It's the same way with Honor. Nobody, even her worst enemies, don't say, well, except maybe on Grayson, don't say, well, she shouldn't be a starship captain at all. She's a woman. Okay. I mean, you haven't seen anybody, none of her enemies in Manticore or in the Solarian League or in Haven who ever trotted that one out. And the reason is that it is just so utterly not a factor in their thinking on the galactic template of her time. Right. So, you know, like I say, you know, there's a lot that goes, and another thing that goes into sustaining a series like this is an author who can sustain enough interest in the books himself to sustain the energy in the books. There are a couple of places where I feel like the energy level drags in the Honorverse. But they don't drag because of it doesn't drag because of waning interest on my part. If you go back and you look at what was going on in my life at the time those books were being written. War of Honor, we lost, I think 5 months on our original deadline because Simon & Schuster moved the release date. So I didn't have time for the final edit. So I probably would have reduced War of Honor's word count by maybe 10%. That's about what I squeeze out in a final edit. At All Costs, we were up against deadline pressure again. That time it was my fault. And because of that, there was a passage that I removed early in the book, intending to put in a different form later in the book, and forgot to put in. And so the Genevieve Chin, the Havenite admiral, who's commanding the fleet that comes in through, you know, as the ambush fleet kind of thing. When Honor Harrington launches the multi-drive missiles at her at 3 light minutes range, she doesn't react quickly. And the reason she doesn't react quickly is that she was briefed by their Office of Naval Intelligence and told that the maximum effective range of these weapons was only, I'm sorry, it's like 6 light minutes. That the effective range of them was going to be no more than 4 light minutes. And it took long enough for her own tactical instincts to override that briefing. But because I forgot to put the briefing back in, you have Genevieve Chin, a competent officer. You don't know why she waits as long as she does to make the decision to hype her out. Those are the kind of things that I regret when they happen. And you can't help it. You can't write a series for 25 years and not have moments when something like that is going to happen.
I was just gonna say, you pulled out the 6 light minute thing, like just out of fresh, like thin air, and I'm like, you know that he's been living in that world for so long that he just knows.
Too long.
Yeah,
that actually, that whole thing kind of leads into one of the questions that was rolling through the chat, and there have been plenty of them. Let me tell you, but somebody wanted to know if you were going to start the Honor series over today, what would you do differently?
Good question.
The main thing that I would do differently would probably affect the computer tech and the degree to which individuals are continually wired in. Okay? Because remember, like I say, I wrote the first 2 books before the internet even existed.
Yeah, Bacillus Station was like 93, right?
Yeah. Well, that was the release. I'd written them like a year and a half earlier.
Ah, okay.
Because they had to go through production and everything else. But the pervasiveness of social media. I mean, I was in a restaurant with Sharon, my wife, she who must be obeyed in Greenville, about a month ago.
I love that.
And we're sitting here, and well, she just married me again, down in Atlanta in a vow renewal.
I saw that. Congratulations, I think.
Yeah. But anyway, we're sitting in this restaurant and we're looking around, and there's probably 20, 30 people in the restaurant. Every one of them has an iPhone or an iPad out working on it instead of talking to the people at the table with them or whatever. And when I started the Honorverse, you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. It literally was not possible. All right. And I saw something like it coming, but I was thinking in terms of desktop units, which is why you have, all the comm screens and everything else that they're talking on, and the 3-dimensional projections and everything else. But I really had not seen somebody basically carrying around on his or her belt a tiny computer that was tied into something called the internet. Now, some of that stuff you can kind of retrofit, because there were the personal comms all the way through and everything else. So it wasn't that difficult, especially when I was able to go back and insert the Unilink technology into Stephanie Harrington's time. If you follow what I'm saying, there now is kind of this seamless assumption that it was always there and I just wasn't talking to you about it. But the truth is that until maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I hadn't really filled that niche in the universe at all. It's been a helpful add. There's some other things that I probably would have done differently, but that's probably the big one. Now, a lot of people have asked me why they're still using keyboards instead of voice recognition software or neural interfacing. That was a conscious decision on my part, because I had just recently done both the Dahak books. Well, I had done them a couple, 3 years early, but they were fairly recently released. And The Path of the Fury, both of which had neural interfacing and self-aware computers and all the rest of it. And I didn't want, especially if I was starting what I hoped would be as much as an 8-book series, that I didn't want to. Yeah, that's why I projected it at.
How'd that work out for you, David?
Oh, really well, actually. Now, see what you did. You made me forget.
I'm sorry.
Okay, but I wanted to be on fresh ground in terms of the technology. Okay, which is why the propulsion system works differently, the hyperspace works differently. Everything is different. And I probably would do that again. Now, as far as the voice recognition software is concerned, they use voice recognition software a lot in the Honorverse. They just don't use it in combat situations, because they don't want there to be any ambiguity because somebody's voice changed because the adrenaline spiked or
Right.
something like that. I mean, I understand that the speech engines are going to be a whole lot better 2,000 years from now. Okay. But I work with voice recognition software every single day. All right. And the thing is that if you don't have genuine artificial sentience in there, parsing what you're saying and saying, okay, if you're serious about this, I will detonate all the warheads in the tubes, but would you want to rethink that, kind of thing.
That's how you end the series.
I'm sorry, Dave, but the whole, you don't want the computer to make a mistake because did you guys ever see the movie, The Bedford Incident?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I don't know that one.
Well, the Bedford Incident is a story. It was written in the late 50s, 60s, about an American naval ship, the Bedford, which is an anti-submarine vessel, and a Russian submarine off the New England coast. And one of the main characters aboard the Bedford was a German U-boat commander during World War II. And he's NATO now, but he's kind of torn in this stalking match that's going on. The skipper of the Bedford is trying basically to prosecute the contact and run the Russian off. He doesn't really want to attack him. But this drags on and on and on. And there's somebody asks him at one point, says, well, what would you do if he turns on you? And he says, well, if he turns on me, I will fire one. And his exhausted tactical lover says, aye, sir, fire one. Poof, fires off a sub-rocket.
Oh, no.
Okay. And takes out the submarine, the whole 9 yards. It's not a good day in the North Atlantic. And I didn't want to have fertile ground for that situation, if you see what I'm saying, because I would have been tempted to use it. And the military would not use a software system that lent itself to that glitch without a self-aware brain on the other side of it. The XO in the Bedford she's just exhausted.
Right.
Okay. So he doesn't say, tell me again. Now, actually, in U.S. Navy practice, you're supposed to repeat the order before you execute it. Okay. But
it's kind of like a confirmation before you.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, I'm doing it. Are you sure? Yeah.
You sure about this?
Yeah. But the big thing was that in the Honorverse, I decided that there would be no truly self-aware artificial intelligence. And I did that for two reasons. One was that I'm less convinced than some of the rosy folks out there that we will come up with a computer which has an ego and an id. Okay, because there's more bound up in there than just speed of calculations and density of the data net. And I'm not, Jim Hogan actually tackled that very well in a novel that's probably 25, 30 years old now called Two Faces of Tomorrow, where he tackled what happens when the brilliant software is smart enough to start thinking for itself, but not self-aware enough to realize maybe that's a bad idea. Okay. And that's the scary thing to me about AI. Okay. Is that it's uninhibited enough that it can give free scope to unintended consequences. And the more and more our technology is controlled by software, the more and more likely it is that something relatively innocuous could wind up having major consequences. Okay. There was a passenger plane that dived something like 5,000 feet here recently, and it was a software glitch in the cockpit, and the pilot recovered, but yeah, you got to probably, that was a scary thing, so I'm not as convinced that we're going to have self-aware intelligence as a lot of other people. But people ask me, where's the AI in the universe? The universe is lousy with AI. It's everywhere you go, Yeah, you think that they steer a starship with a joystick without a lot of AI interpreting the movements of the stick and the finger controls on it, the whole 9 yards. There's a huge amount of AI in the Honorverse. It's just that for them, it's as much a part of their universe as the light switch is to us. Okay. And so I spend a lot of time explaining hardware to the reader, but I do it usually, if you look at it, I do it through the way that an in-universe character might think about it. Okay.
Well, and also that's one of the things that you brought up when you're talking about kind of mapping out the series or continuing the series over a long period of time is that the tech increases as the conflict grows or as the story grows. One of the things that came to mind during the Honor Harrington series are two things that I remember specifically. There's probably more, but only two that came to mind while you were saying it. Was the LAX, the light attack craft, and the keyhole sensor platforms.
Yep.
And both of those kind of changed the way that that battle and that warfare worked in the time. And it was neat because you have to explain that to obviously the people that are fighting the war, because some people don't understand what's going on to it. But it's an easy way to bring the reader in and say, here, this is the new tech. This is how it works.
Without doing an as you know, Bob.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I will say that I cheated a little bit in that respect in the earlier books, because all the people's commissioners were total naval dolts.
Right. They had no idea. Yeah.
And so Theismann and the other professional officers had to explain it to them. They weren't explaining it to the reader. They were explaining it to the people's commissioner. But then when the people's commissioner started getting a clue, then the info dumps had to go more into the narrative.
Right.
And there are some people who hate the info dumps. There are other people who say, man, this is great stuff. I find that I have people who will come up to me and they say, I really like the battle sequences, but my eyes glaze over when you're describing all the hardware and stuff. But man, I do love the characters. And they'll come and then have somebody else come in and say, man, I love the battles and the hardware, but all that politics crap, geez, but I do love the characters. Other people come to see, I love the fact that you have the political subtext for the war, but my God, the battles with all those missiles flying around, they just go on forever. But I do love the characters. Okay. And I'm sensing a thread in there, and the fact that they're finding something else in the books that they like enough to invest in them means that I'm offering a broad enough menu to attract a disparity, not a disparity. That's not right. A diverse
crowd.
Crowd of readers.
It's outstanding.
One of the interesting things about that is that, and I don't know whether you have noticed it or if you did it on purpose, but so there's a disparity between the reviews that I've seen on Shadow of Victory and Uncompromising Honor. Whereas in Shadows of Victory, it was very, I want to say it was all negative, but there was a lot of reviews that people came through in Shadows of Victory. And then in Uncompromising Honor, and I'm just going on Amazon on your side of it, you're not strictly Amazon, so the reviews are skewed a little bit. But for Amazon, let's just say for here, Shadow of Victory, 831 reviews, and it's a 3-star average. In Uncompromising Honor, you have 324. There's less because it's not been out as long, but you have a 4.4 average. For that. So do you know that you made a different choice in those books? Do you have an inkling of what happened there with the readers?
I know exactly what happened. And there were 3 or 4 factors involved. One of them was that I needed that book structurally to do something to make Uncompromising Honor work. Okay. And I needed to give the reader a deeper view into what was going on in the protectorates under Solarian rule. Okay, I needed to develop the character of Damien Harahap because of where he's going. And I had a lot of people, yeah, I don't even like Damien Harahap. Why is he spending so much time with him? Okay, because you're going to like him. Trust me. Okay, you didn't like Clinkscales when you met him either. All right? You know. And the other thing is that book went back like over a year and ended up at almost exactly the same point that the preceding book had ended up, because I had to do the stuff that I was doing over there. Now, not all readers may agree with me about that, but as the architect building the structure, that was a load-bearing element that I felt. And if you're writing, a lot of what you're doing is, does this feel right? Does this feel wrong? And sometimes you figure out after the fact why it felt one way or the other. Okay, but I needed that load-bearing element in there. So I went back and I did it. And the other mistake that I made was, and this was a factor of the fact that this was right in the middle of where I was hitting the wall that I was telling you about. I was doing the final author's edit on the proofs on this book and At the Sign of Triumph simultaneously. They were sending them to me from Bain in like 25 and 30 page tranches. And I was sitting out here and in my office and working on them when I was also working on 4.5 hours a night of sleep. So it was very clever of me, I thought, to figure out what the names of these institutions on my Czech planet and my Polish planet would have been in Czech and Polish respectively. And I got my Czech friends and my Polish friends to help me out with that. The problem is that what I should have done is I should have used the Czech or the Polish name the first time that they appeared and used the acronym based on the Czech or the Polish, but then use the English translation for them all the way through, because people got really confused over which damn planet they were on because they don't speak Czech, they don't speak Polish, okay? And that was purely because I was so brain dead that I didn't hear in my author's ear what I would have heard under other circumstances, which is, this is too much of a good thing. And so that's a very valid criticism of the book. And if I ever get a chance to do a re-edit on it, I'll go in and I'll fix that. There's a lot of the other complaints, I think, are based on disappointment that they didn't get Uncompromising Honor in that book. Okay.
Right.
And the sense that we've already been here, already done that. I would also say that one of the reasons that book had to be done was because of what I was saying about the Solarian League not having had 20 years, 25 years to get a clue. Because I was working on shifting the tactical and the strategic balance and the reader's understanding of it into a way that would make the events in Uncompromising Honor, the things that go on in Hypatia and the other star systems, make sense. And I'm not sure that they do make full sense to somebody who hasn't read Shadow of Victory. And I think probably also I really messed up when I called it Shadow of Victory, because that led people before they read the book to expect. And see, what I was talking about a shadow of victory because they hadn't gotten there yet.
Right.
All right. But they're looking at it as this is the book where they emerge victorious.
Right.
And it
bittersweet ending.
Didn't happen. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. When you've written as many books as I've written, okay, there are things that happen that you're like, well, that could have gone better. I should have done that, and you kind of put that in your toolkit for further down the road. One of the great things about Toni Weisskopf at Bain Books, she was my editor before she was my publisher. She is a fantastic editor. She will edit the current manuscript, okay? And I wish she was in a position to do more editing. She just doesn't have time anymore. But she will edit the book in progress if she sees a problem in it that needs to be fixed. But what she's really good at is after you're done, she's really good at saying, okay, this book really worked. But next time, I want you to think about how you did X, Y, or Z, and whether or not that was the best way to handle that part of it. Okay, just think about it the next time around. That's good editing. That's really good editing. It's the hard. I've done editing myself, and the hardest thing of all is to avoid saying, "There's a problem here, and this is how you should fix it." Okay. The problem is saying there's a problem here. Here's what the problem is. How do you think it should be fixed?
Yeah.
And you remember what I was saying about
kind of makes your writer's muscle grow and work a little bit harder than just.
Yeah. Well, okay. You learn to write by writing. Okay. It's like learning to walk, learning to play soccer or whatever. The more you do it, the more you work at it, the better you get. Eventually, you'll probably plateau somewhere. In my own case, I haven't reached that point yet, but but that's how it works. Okay, and I think that people need to bear that in mind, both as aspiring writers and as readers. And I think what writers also need to bear in mind is that what sells books is the writer's voice. The same story told by two different authors, two different storytelling voices, will be completely different.
Yep, absolutely.
And you know, if the readers like one writer's storytelling voice and don't like another, then they think writer number A is brilliant and writer number B is a boob, even if when you get to the end of the story, exactly the same stuff happened.
Right.
I'm 100% a voice guy over story. I mean, like, I have, like, Jim Butcher is one of my favorite. And,
man, I love Jim.
His voice is amazing. And I could read that same urban fantasy written by 30 different authors, and like, I'm going to have different opinions versus for each one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Dean Koontz.
Yeah.
You know, Dean Koontz has just a wonderful storytelling voice. And Patricia McKillip. Oh my God. Have you read The Riddle Masters?
No.
Riddle Master of Head. Yeah.
Riddle Master of Head. I mean, that is
back in the day. Yeah.
That is a small, as in not big word count, masterpiece. That's a Sistine Chapel of fantasy. Okay?
It is. It really is.
And I cannot over recommend that book. And she didn't need 200,000. I don't think she needed 100,000 words per book to tell the story that she was telling. And it's like every word is beautifully cut and faceted and laid into place. And that's why she produces 1 or 2 books a year and I produce 3. Okay. I'm telling the story. And I want to get out there and tell it, and I've got so many more behind it, pushing it out of the way, that I have to finish this one so I can start the next one. Because if I don't, Skippy will be out here working in the middle of the night when I thought I was asleep. You know what I'm saying? And that's a good problem to have, but it's also a terrible problem to have, because I cannot keep, if I kept a book and kept polishing it, I would keep it for 5 years before I turned it loose. Okay. And you can't do that. Not if you're going to do this as a profession. If you're going to do it as an avocation, then yes, you can, and you should. But if you're going to do it as a vocation, then you need to do it in a way that actually, I don't know, pays the bills, keeps your kids fed, you know,
right.
I got 3 of them getting ready to go to college. All right. You know, so I think of this as a craft, not an art. And I think of myself as a craftsman, not an artiste. That doesn't mean that there aren't times that I'm proud of what I did, that I think this is a really good passage, or that I don't think that I do it well. What it means is that, to me, the story is more important than anything else.
But don't you think there is some blurring of that line between craftsman and artist?
Oh, there always is. There always is. And it's kind of like, all right, my younger brother was a production potter for 30 years. and my sister is one of the best hand weavers in the country. And she makes, you know, she spins her own thread and yarns. Okay, they were both craftspeople too, but clearly what they did rose to the level of art. Okay, what I do rises to the level of art on occasion, but I'm not one of those people who can say, "Oh, I can't go there because the art will suffer." Okay, if that's where the story needs to go, then I'm going there and art be hanged. All right. And I think when I killed Andrew LaFollette, okay, I was so sure I was going to have to move to Montana and raise rabbits under an assumed name, okay? Because you killed Andrew, you know. I mean, you know, give me a break. But anyway, I wrote that section of the book 4 or 5 times trying not to kill him, and it didn't work.
Right.
It just did not work. And it was not until I'd sent the manuscript off that I realized why it didn't work. You know why it didn't work? Honor loses 90+% of her family in the Iwata strike, but you've never met them. Miranda and Andrew, okay, Farragut, okay, them you know and you love, and you know how much they mean to Honor. So when they died, you can extrapolate from that to what it must have been like for her to lose everybody. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, the reader just feels it.
Yeah, I hadn't reasoned that out when I did it. It was just that something in my writer's instinct, if you want to call it that, my storytelling mode was telling me that I couldn't not kill him. Okay? And I think that when I did Shadow of Victory, I was exhausted enough that I didn't realize how my writer's voice had been muted by the fatigue, to the point that I didn't see the problems that we were just talking about with that book. I don't think it deserved as many 1-star reviews as it got, but I do understand why it was not reviewed as highly as some of the other books in the series. War of Honor suffers from that a little bit too. And again, in that one, I didn't have time for the final edit, and I think that's why people have some problems with it. Now, At All Costs is one of my most popular books, but I have this one fan who refers to it as the awful book because he doesn't like the tactical decisions that were made in it. You know.
Wow.
Did I ever tell you about the NASA scientist who sent me an email to tell me that my acceleration figures were wrong? And I said back and I said, well, you know, I don't allow for relativistic effect because it just gets too complicated. He said, oh, I know that, but they're still wrong. So I said, okay, what should they be? And he sent them to me, and I looked at them and I compared them. And I said, well, you realize that I rounded to the 1,000th place. And all he said back to me was, well, if you're going to be that way. But
that kind of reminds me of the first story like that I ever heard. It was Larry Niven when he walked outside his hotel room and all those people were chanting, "The ring world is unstable."
yeah.
And I was like, man, you better be on top of your game if you're going to write for these people.
Well, okay. I will say that if there is any mistake in your books, one of your fans will find it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay? And the more fans you have, the more that approaches unity. You know,
it's a mob.
Yeah, you know, it's like if you only have 12 readers, you probably get away with crap forever. Okay. You know, and that's good because it means that they are invested in what you're doing.
Right.
That you've sucked them in enough that they care to actually run the numbers and realize, wait. I had a guy who sent me an email. He said, you know, I was running the numbers on your battle. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, the really funny thing was that they all checked. He said, because there are big chunks where I wasn't telling him what was going on, you know, but he's like, I could figure out what had happened in the interim by backtracking from the numbers that you gave us. And I said, well, that's the way it's supposed to work, but you are a little
I'm
anal,
just not
aren't
sure
you?
I'm that smart.
He said, yeah, I've been told. You know. So,
Well, it's interesting about that because we had a conversation with an author. His name's Michael Cooper, and he writes military science fiction. This conversation we had was probably a couple of years ago, back in season 1, probably, and we were talking about like just enormous space battles. And on scale, he said, when you look at how many naval vessels we have in present day on the Earth, well, one planet, and how many naval vessels we have on the ocean, you have to take if you had a civilization that spanned all these
they'd
galaxies,
need a lot of ships.
it'd be a lot. I mean,
Millions
you're
and
talking
millions.
millions and millions
Yeah.
of ships.
Well, the Jerry Pournell, I'm pretty sure it was Jerry, said that living at the bottom of a gravity well has accustomed us to thinking small.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I actually had that in mind when I designed Dahak. I was like, okay, Jerry, tell me I thought small on this one. I hadn't realized quite how big that ship was, because I figured out mass and volume for all those missile launchers and everything else. And the reason that it's got all those park decks is because even after I got done putting in, like, I think 20 park decks, I've still only used about a third of the internal volume of the ship. So it's like, yeah, well, there's it's a fixer upper, okay. There's room, there's bonus rooms that you can work on.
It's like everybody gets their own private bathroom.
Oh well, hey, look at the look at the captain's quarters. He's got a 3-acre atrium outside his quarters, okay? Because I was thinking, like, in terms of the surface area of the moon when I started building the ship. And then I realized, no, it's a sphere, Dave. Okay?
There's things inside.
There's lots of things inside that
when you can mine entire planets for resources, you can go big.
Oh yeah. Well, what can I say? I think that science fiction, I've said this many times, I may have said it the last time we talked, I think that science fiction is the fairy tales of a technological society, because science fiction does exactly the same things that fairy tales did. It explains, it cautions, it warns, it inspires, the whole 9 yards. Just instead of trolls and whatnot, we've got cyborgs, and instead of warlocks, we've got scientists, okay? Because we have a different referential basis for how things work, but we're still telling the same kinds of stories, okay?
Right.
And that means that I think one of the differences, though, between fairy tales and science fiction is that in science fiction, part of it depends on how thoroughly and convincingly you extrapolate the future from the present and the past. Whereas in a fairy tale, you're not really trying to project where the civilization the fairy tale is told from is going to be technologically in 100 years or 500 years. The assumption is it's going to be where it was forever. You see what I'm saying?
It's almost, actually, it's really hard to, on present day, it's really hard to kind of extrapolate where you're going to be at in 100 years, because who would have thought 100 years ago we'd be at where we're at now?
Well,
so trying to think of.
I saw this on Facebook, and it was like, if you could talk to somebody from 1950 and tell him one thing about the present day that he wouldn't believe, what would you tell him? And my favorite was, in 60 years, everybody will be carrying a prodigiously capable computer around in his pocket and using it to share pictures of bunnies.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Everybody will be carrying
a
computer in their pocket.
Yeah.
Can I argue, though, that if we went back like 100 years, the greatest thing we could ever tell people is if they walked into a room, the air would be conditioned to the proper temperature.
Yeah.
Like living in Texas, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you that. But they did have air conditioning starting 100 years ago.
Yeah. It's right
trust me, I've been doing research for Safehold. Okay. Oh, absolutely. I think that I had a discussion with a guy who has a at least a double doc. I think he may have a triple doctorate. And we were arguing. Well, we're not arguing. We were discussing because we were both interested in it. About who wrote the better science fiction. Somebody who is totally wired into where we are right now.
Okay.
And knew where all the research was going, and somebody who had only a layman's grasp of where we are. And we came to what I think was an interesting conclusion. We concluded that for near future science fiction, the hard science guy has it all over the layman, assuming equal storytelling capability. Okay.
Well, it kind of makes sense, though.
Okay. Midterm, he's got near future, because he knows where we're going. He knows where all the research is. He can bring in all the nuts and bolts, to track it. Okay. Now, get out about 100, 150 years, okay, and his advantage begins to dwindle, because who knows what we're going to be capable of in 100 years. But when you get out, say, 500 or 600 years, the layman actually has the advantage because he doesn't know and isn't blinkered by what we know today and what we're doing today. You see what I'm saying?
Because he doesn't know at the end of a gravity well, everything's small.
Yeah. Well, but what I'm saying is that the person who doesn't know that you can't do this is in, I don't know, 1860 something, going to extrapolate a submarine with a fireless, combustionless power source that cruises the oceans of the world. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you had asked any marine engineer in the world about that, they would have said Jules Verne is an absolute lunatic. Okay. But there's a reason the U.S. Navy named its first nuclear submarine the Nautilus.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm not saying that that all of us are Jules Verne, but what I am saying is that you reach a point on the technological event horizon where not knowing that something can't be done lets you do it. And eventually the rest of the human race, not you, because you don't have a clue how to do it, gets smart enough to figure out how to do it. Okay, it's one of my favorite things that David writes Hammer Slam. David Drake. See, this is still some of that concussion thing hanging in there because David is a friend of mine. But anyway, one of my favorite things that he ever did was he wrote an essay on the technology of the Hammer Slammers. Okay. And he explained, he actually talked about his Vietnam experience with an armored battalion and how that factored into it and whatnot. But he gets to the point where he's talking about the energy stored in the copper plastic discs that's released, and he says, yeah, that's how, and that's what powers the weapon, Sam. How it does it? That's an engineering issue. Talk to them.
That's the hand wavium that we just pushed in front of there.
I love hand wavium.
With the right with the right isotope of polonium, you could do anything.
There you go.
Okay, but I think that you have to limit yourself in the hand wavium or the polonium that you introduce, because in my opinion, it's the limitations the characters face that make the book, not the capabilities they have.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, all right, Honor Harrington. People talk about Honor Harrington and all that she's accomplished. If you actually look at Honor Harrington, what she has accomplished primarily is to inspire other people to perform at 130% of capacity. I mean, think about it. Yes, she's a brilliant commander. Yes, this, yes, that, yes, the other. But she has accomplished what she's accomplished by convincing other people that they can accomplish more than they ever thought that they could. All right. And that's why you see so many of her junior officers as they grow and mature, becoming outstanding senior officers. I mean, think about Scotty Tremaine. Okay, you met him as this wet behind the ears, ensign. Yep. Okay, and by the end
doing
of
customs checks.
Yes, and not very well. And by the end of the book, he and Horace are running, a heavy cruiser missile group that eats Solarian battle cruisers for breakfast. Okay, that's part of this whole process, this whole texturing thing that has to happen in a long running series. The two things that I had decided about Honor Harrington when I wrote the book were that she was not going to be James Tiberius Kirk, whose highest and best function was to command a starship, however much she loved command. Okay. And number two, that she was going to be promoted to the level of seniority that her accomplishments and her skill set justified. And I can do that in a way that somebody like C.S. Forster or Patrick O'Brien can't, because they're writing within a historical context. And unless they want the war to end differently, which their readers are going to go, wait, that's not why I read historical fiction.
Yeah,
they're sort of painted into a corner as to how high Horatio Hornblower can be promoted, for example. With Honor Harrington, it's an open-ended history for her going forward. So she can be promoted. She can become a stedholder and a duchess. And she was supposed to do all that and then die, because you can't send a stedholder and a duchess and the commander of Home Fleet on death rides anymore.
Right. Okay? It's kind of like the whole Captain Picard, I want to go on every away mission thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, we were talking about Uncompromising Honor, and then that's kind of capping Harrington's story. A lot of the people have been talking about you left it open for some continuations there, and I was just curious, what do you have coming up in the next round of books that you have publishing this next year? You mentioned another Safehold book, and then we talked about Chris Kennedy's book.
Yeah, in January we have Through Fiery Trials, which is the next Safehold novel. And it starts a year or so after At the Sign of Triumph ends, and covers about 15 years, which for me is moving at breakneck speed. And it was originally going to start 15 years further along, but I realized there was way too much that was having to be done in flashback and people explaining things to each other. So instead, I picked the critical things that had to happen in that time frame and did them in the book. And I think it works a whole lot better.
Yeah.
In May, I have a book coming out with Jacob Holo. It's a collaboration, The Gordian Protocol, which is time travel.
That's the one you talked to us about last time.
Yep. And I'd wanted to write that. This is one of the series that I pitched to Jim Bain at the same time that I pitched Honor Harrington, and I'm finally getting to write it. Same thing
Very
for
cool.
Safehold. And Jim could only pick one, okay, and he'd been looking for somebody to do Horatio Hornblower in space for like forever. Okay, so he didn't hesitate. I think he got as far as reading Honor Harrington as 6'2" Eurasian starship captain. That was all over. That was it. We were done. We were done. And judging by the success of the series, his judgment was probably good. Although I think Safehold's done moderately well.
Safehold's good. Yeah.
But the Gordian Protocol, I'm very pleased with the way that it came out. Jacob is an engineer. He works for BMW. And I told him that I wanted him to build the 30th century, because I built so many civilizations now that I didn't want an echo of Honor Harrington or something else in there.
Sure.
And he did me proud, including the Alpha Centauri colony, which was made by sending probes with nanobots on board that harvested stuff, built a space station, built a refinery, built a receiver, built the equipment to build the synthetic bodies for the colonists, and then you beam the colonists from Earth to Alpha Centauri and download them into the bodies waiting for them. And I was like, that is so cool. And he created one of my favorite characters in the entire book, Philosophus, who is a connectome. He's an artificial being who never had a body. People in this 30th century suffer. They have going meatless parties when they decide to upload themselves to the net, because the act of recording their minds destroys their physiological brains, which actually makes sense when you think about the amount of data that's being extracted in a reasonably short period of time. But Philo was never a human being. He's always been, and he manifests as a 6'6" tall, red-haired, flowing bearded Viking with a helmet with horns on it, And Raybert, who's one of the characters that I invented, but Jacob had so much fun with. But when Raybert's a historian, he's a time traveler, and when he first meets Philo at his father's, Raybert's going meatless party, he says, "You do know that real Vikings didn't have horns on their helmets." And Philo looks at him and says, "Well, you may be worth talking to after all." So it's kind of, I love Philo, but I'm really looking forward to that. Everybody on the first readers list and whatnot who has read the book has really, really liked it. And Jacob and I are planning a sequel to it if I can ever get loose from the other fires that I am working on right now long enough to sit down with him and do the final discussion of the plot outline. He can go and start writing his part. I am currently working with the other person that I need to sit down with that I haven't yet is Jane Linscoe, because we are going to do at least one more Stephanie Harrington book, and she and I need to discuss the plot elements in it so that she can get started. And she's, fortunately, I think she's working on something else right now, so she probably isn't lying there saying, "I hate you, David Weber. I hate you, David." That will come later. I am currently working with Chris Kennedy on Into the Light, which we mentioned earlier. My next solo project for Bain, which I haven't started yet and technically was supposed to turn in at the end of October, will be the sequel to Sword of the South. Well, one of the smartest things that Toni Weisskopf ever did after we nearly lost me a year and a half ago is she decided she wasn't going to break the David. Okay. I mean, she literally has told 2 or 3 people who want to do collaboration project, "No, you'll break him," and refused to let them go ahead. But she has made the decision that she is not going to schedule one of my books before she has the manuscript. Publishers like to be able to schedule looking forward. Right. They'd like to have but she's not going to schedule a book until I actually deliver it. And that does 2 things. One is it means I'm not going to be spending 8 months getting 4 hours of sleep chasing a deadline. Okay. And not realizing, because of the shape I'm getting into, that I'm getting less and less done every day.
Right.
I'm still getting something done, and that's what my brain is telling me I need to be doing. So that's not going to happen. The other thing that's not going to happen, or that is going to happen, is that I have time now. When I started writing, Toni, when she got a manuscript from me, she would put it on the shelf and wait, because she knew 2 months later the real final edit would arrive. Okay. The one that she put on the shelf was, in case, the micrometeorite came through the window or something, and I'd gotten to the point where I didn't have time to do that. I did have time to do that for both the Gordian Protocol and Uncompromising Honor, and I think it shows in both books. So I think it's one of the smartest things, and I also think that Toni did it because, in addition to being my publisher and my editor, she has been my close personal friend for 30 years.
Actually, I was at LibertyCon this past year. I actually met you, and I had a chance to sit down and talk with Toni for a while. And she seemed, from the conversation we had, she seemed like she was just top notch, just super competent. She knew exactly what the way she talked, it's like she would try to get to know each of her writers and what their specific kind of needs and things were. And I was super impressed by her from just the short conversation we had.
Well, you do realize that I think it was her grandfather, might have been her dad, but I think it was her grandfather, won the Nobel Prize for mathematics.
Did not know that.
Brains run in her family, and she was not hiding behind the door when they were handed out. And then she had an opportunity to understudy Jim Bain, who was probably one of the the smartest, most innovative publishers of science fiction ever. Okay, Spider Robinson said about him once that Jim Baen was the only science fiction publisher he knew who actually wanted to live in the 21st century.
Right. I remember him from when I was a kid.
Yeah. And then we lost him just barely into the 21st century. I think he was only 52 or something when he had the stroke. And it was just, science fiction, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I don't think science fiction as a genre and an industry realizes even now how much we lost when we lost Jim Baen that early. He was the kind of guy who stirred stuff up and made change happen. And he would be in heaven today. He is in heaven today. But he would be just absolutely delighted with where electronic publishing and so forth has gone.
Yeah, you think so?
Oh, absolutely. Jim was one of the first people to realize that the internet is the world's biggest library shelf. Okay, the rule of thumb used to be that for every copy you put on a library shelf, you sold 6 copies. Okay,
right. I've heard that.
That's why he created the Baen Free Library. It's why he created the e-arcs that people can buy. His whole object was to make the work available as quickly as possible to the reader, and to embrace the electronic ability to get it to them. I think of the internet as sort of Gutenberg on steroids.
Oh, I totally can see that for sure.
Okay, because e-publishing has done to paperbacks what the printing press did to the scriptorium. Okay, I mean, I'm sorry, that's what it's done, and I think the cream will probably float to the top, but I've seen enough cases where what I thought was cream clearly didn't catch whatever current might have carried it to the top that I'm not sure about.
Right.
I did.
Like you said, a lot of it's luck.
Yeah, I did a foreword for an introduction for one of the Four Horsemen books for Chris Kennedy, and I said, the best thing about the internet is that stuff that you never would have gotten to read in traditional publishing is now available to you. The worst thing about the internet is that things you never would have gotten to read in traditional publishing are now available to you.
Absolutely true.
Okay, and part of the problem is, how do you wade through it to find the nuggets? Okay, and
well, I mean, don't you think social proof comes in? I mean, the reviews and that kind of thing come into play at some point there.
The problem is everyone has 50 friends willing to give a 5-star rating.
That's also true. That's also true.
That's a problem. Another problem is that there are so many books out there being rated that you really kind of have to reach into the pool with one hand and snatch out a fish and find out what it is after you get it out. You know what I'm saying? And also, especially with self-publishing, you don't have I know this publishing house's track record.
Yeah.
And therefore, I know it's going to be good. I know it's going to be well edited, or I know it's going to be Trek. And there are some of the online publishing outfits like Chris Kennedy who are working on establishing those same kinds of levels. But to be totally honest, most of the people running them have not served a full apprenticeship before they started electronically publishing. So some of the editing mistakes that they're making, somebody who had come up through a traditional, I'm going to be first read the slush pile, then I'm going to be a junior editor, then I'm going to be a continuity editor. They're missing things that somebody who had that institutional training would have had, but you can't put enough people with that institutional training on the street to keep up with the volume of e-literature.
I never would have thought about it in that context about learning how to I mean, I know I read books and I'm like, oh, that's crap, but I say that about Patrick Rothfuss, right? Like, I don't like his books, but obviously they're phenomenal. So like what you're saying makes sense. I would never have made that connection. Though.
You know, I hate Brandon Sanderson, but man, do you love
who can cut that guy off?
Well, I
disconnect.
I have to say that, you know, I don't care how good a writer you are. There's somebody out there that you are not going to work for. Okay.
Right.
No matter how good you are, there is somebody out there who's going to say, I don't understand why everybody else likes this guy. These freaking info dumps are so boring. I go to sleep halfway through the book. Okay.
So
I mean, no matter who you are, there's something that's not going to work. But I guess maybe it goes back to the fact that I think of this as a craft. Okay. I really do think of it as there being an apprentice period and a journeyman period that you're working your way through, because there are no shortcuts. The problem is that in electronic publishing, you don't need to make it all the way to the finish line to be in print. And some people are doing incredible damage to themselves, both as writers and as in terms of potential audience, by putting stuff out that they should not have put out. I can survive a book like Shadow of Victory getting bad reviews because I've got a sufficient body of work out there that people are like, well, maybe this was an aberration, you know, and look, this next book that he did was really good, etc. But if you get out there early and you don't have an editor keeping an eye on you, you don't have a good self-edit function that is experienced at knowing where the mistakes are, then you, like Sharon, my wife, was she was a water safety instructor and a lifeguard for like 20 years before her scoliosis took her out. She was a synchro swim coach. And she says, you know, people say that practice makes perfect, but only if what you are doing, you do perfectly. If you practice it doing it wrong, you get very, very good at making mistakes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
And there's not a feedback loop in a lot of the self-published stuff from someone inside the process to tell you that you need to work to be Tony Weisskopf and say, well, this kind of worked this time, but next time around, I need you to think about this.
Yeah.
Okay. And you pay attention to the negative reviews or you don't. If you pay attention to negative reviews, I don't care who you are, you go out and you slit your throat. Okay. Because I mean, if you some of the reviews on Amazon for some of my books are like, you know, they're downright brutal. And in some cases,
people are mean.
Well, in some cases, it's because they deserved it. In other cases, it's because I'm going to prove that just because this guy is a name author, that doesn't mean I think he walks on water. I mean, I had one guy, I swear to God, 5 books in a row. I have read everything David Weber ever written, but this piece of garbage is the last book I'm ever going to buy. 5 books in a row. Started out exactly the same way.
There's always one of those, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, but you don't want to be carried away by the good reviews either. I basically don't read reviews. I basically go by what I see on my fan site in discussion on the books on my website. I go by what I hear in conversation with my readers. One of the things that I think helps to maintain the books is that I try to stay pretty involved with my readers. I'm not on social media the way that some people are. And I don't have time to be on social media that way. But I try to be available to them, and so does Sharon. And I think that helps, because I think it helps when you decide that the person who writes the books that you write isn't an asshole. Yeah. Okay. It's really hard to get past the fact that this guy is a dyed-in-the-wool jerk and still like his books.
Well, you also get to realize that the author is actually a person too. It's just not the person writing words that you're reading. Sure, and it goes back to a lot of things you get on Facebook or the internet, where you say a lot of things that you say a lot of things online that you wouldn't say in person to someone.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think when you put a face on, you know, yourself as a writer and as an author, you put yourself out there for the fans, they'll forgive you for some missteps here and there. But I do want to say we are coming to the end of 2 hours, and so probably going to need to wrap it up. But it's been a fantastic show so far. Your website, what was your website? It's davidweber.net, isn't it?
davidweber.net, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm on it sporadically. It has to do with the workload.
Right.
But I do snippet the books. Oh, we were talking about what we're going to be doing next, way back an hour and a half ago, and I said that I got sidetracked by Tony being smart, which she is, but so Sword of the South is my next solo project for Bane. My next solo project for Tor is going to be the sequel to Through Fiery Trials. Eric Flint and I are getting started on the next Crown of Slaves novel, which is where our undercover skullduggery guys will go looking for the alignment. I'm not going to tell you whether or not they find it. Let's see. And I am my next solo Honorverse novel is probably going to be the story of Alfred Harrington's Marine service before he transferred to the Navy and became a doctor. There've been
so it's a prequel.
Yeah. Well, see. Oh, and I'm sorry. And Tim Zahn and Tom Pope. I told you I had a lot of stuff going on. Tim Zahn and Tom Pope and I are working on A Call to Insurrection, the fourth of the Manticore Ascendant novels. They're going to be a total of 6. So we're 2/3 of the way through the series with the end of this one.
Very cool.
Yeah. And there's something else going on too. I can't remember what, but yeah, it's
busy.
Yeah, well, I tell you the truth. I realized, and I think it was partly hitting the wall that did this for me. I realized that, you know what, you're not getting any younger, and you have a whole bunch of stories that you really want to tell that you're not going to have time to tell if you do them all on your own.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am doing more collaborate. I've always been comfortable doing collaborations, more comfortable than a lot of writers. I mean, Joel Presby and I need to get together and do the sequel to Road to Hell. But let's see, her husband, Andy, has just retired after 22 years in the Navy. They're relocating to Ohio for him to be a real life rocket scientist. She has a baby. There are a few other elements going on in her life,
right?
Too,
So a lot of good things to look forward to this year and the next. But thank you so much for coming on the show, David. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me. But you did say, you were looking at setting a new record. I'm just saying.
That's true. That's true.
I would never have been so loquacious if you hadn't issued the challenge.
Oh, I don't believe that at all. That's flat out lie.
I never use 3 words when one will do.
Everybody that watched during the live show, thank you guys for coming and hanging out with us. It's been a blast. Always is a Monday night show. I don't think we have a guest lined up next week, so it'll be a round table, and hopefully all you guys will come back and join us then. So until then, we will see you guys next week. We're going to talk about some writing, we'll talk about some reading, and of course everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. Later
guys.
All right.
Good night. Thanks for having me.